At the edge of known space, where the stars grew thin and the darkness stretched forever, there floated something that should not exist. It was a shape made of crystal, larger than any ship ever built, older than most civilizations could remember. The thing hung motionless beside the broken remains of what scientists believed was once a gate between galaxies. The gate had collapsed long ago, but the crystal entity remained. Every species that traveled through this region had a name for it. The Valori called it the Silent One. The Kreeth Empire marked it on their maps with a symbol that meant, "Do not approach." The Syndicate of Worlds simply labeled the entire area as forbidden space. For 12,000 years, the entity had floated in the same spot. It never moved. It never spoke. It never did anything at all. Ships had come and gone. Some tried to talk to it. Some tried to shoot it. Some tried to cut pieces from its crystalline body. Nothing worked. The entity ignored everything and everyone. After a while, most species stopped trying. They decided it was just a strange rock, a leftover from some ancient time, interesting to look at but ultimately meaningless. They were wrong. The human exploration ship Dawn Chaser dropped out of faster-than-light travel on a quiet Tuesday morning, ship time. It was a small vessel, built for long journeys with a small crew. 7 people lived and worked inside its metal walls. They had been traveling for 8 months, mapping uncharted sectors of space, collecting data that would help future ships navigate these empty regions. Captain Danny Marsh sat in his chair on the bridge and watched the main screen fill with stars. He was a calm man in his early 40s, with gray starting to show at his temples. He had commanded the Dawn Chaser for 6 years and knew his crew well. They were good people, reliable and steady. The kind of team you wanted when you were far from home. "Anything interesting out there?" he asked. Megan Torres, the science officer, studied her console. She was young for her position, only 32. But she had a sharp mind and a talent for finding things others missed. Her fingers moved across the controls as sensor data scrolled past. "Actually, yes," she said. "There's something big about 200,000 kilometers to port. Really big." Danny raised an eyebrow. "How big?" "Bigger than a city. Maybe bigger than a small moon." Megan frowned at her readings. "It's not natural. The shape is too regular. But it's not putting out any energy signature. It's just there." The rest of the crew gathered on the bridge as Megan put the image on the main screen. They all stared in silence. The crystal entity filled the display, its surface catching the faint light of distant stars. It was beautiful in a cold, distant way, like a frozen explosion that had never finished happening. "That's the Eternal Sentinel," said Lisa Park, the navigator. She was a quiet woman who spent most of her free time reading old exploration records. "I've seen it in historical databases. Every species that's come through this region has recorded it. Nobody knows what it is or where it came from." "Has anyone ever made contact?" Danny asked. Lisa shook her head. "Hundreds of attempts over thousands of years. Nothing ever worked. Most scientists think it's dead, if it was ever alive at all." Danny considered this for a moment. Their mission was to map the region, not investigate ancient mysteries. But they had time, and opportunities like this didn't come often. "Let's take a closer look," he decided. "Bring us within safe scanning range." The Dawn Chaser moved slowly toward the Sentinel. As they got closer, the scale of the thing became clear. It was massive beyond easy understanding. A mountain of crystal floating in the void. The surface was covered in patterns that looked almost like writing, or maybe circuitry, or maybe something else entirely. They caught the light and seemed to glow faintly from within. In the engine room, Jake Holloway barely noticed the excitement. He was lying on his back under a coolant pipe, trying to fix a leak that had been bothering him for 3 days. Jake was the maintenance engineer, which was a fancy way of saying he fixed things that broke. He was 29 years old, average height, average build, with brown hair that never stayed neat, and a face that people forgot 5 minutes after meeting him. Jake was not special. He knew this, and had made peace with it long ago. He was not the smartest person on the ship. He was not the bravest or the most talented. He was just a guy who was good at fixing things and bad at most everything else. He talked to machines while he worked, a habit he had picked up as a child and never managed to break. He knew they couldn't hear him. He did it anyway. "Come on," he muttered to the pipe. "Just seal up, that's all I'm asking." One little seal. The pipe did not answer. Jake sighed and reached for another tool. His communicator buzzed. Lisa's voice came through. "Jake, you might want to come up to the bridge. There's something worth seeing." Jake wiped his hands on his pants and climbed out from under the pipe. When he reached the bridge and saw the Sentinel on the main screen, he stopped in the doorway and stared like everyone else had. "What is that?" he asked. "Nobody knows," Megan said. "It's been here for at least 12,000 years, maybe longer." Jake looked at the crystal giant floating in the darkness. Something about it made him feel strange, a heaviness in his chest that he couldn't explain. It looked lonely out there, he thought, lonely and tired, which was a stupid thing to think about a giant crystal that was probably just a rock. But Jake had always been the kind of person who saw feelings in things that weren't supposed to have them. He named the machines he worked on. He apologized to equipment when he had to take it apart. He thanked his tools when a job went well. It was silly and childish, and he knew it. But he couldn't help the way his mind worked. The Dawn Chaser settled into position, a safe distance from the Sentinel. Danny ordered a full sensor sweep. Megan got to work gathering data. The rest of the crew returned to their stations. Jake stayed on the bridge a little longer, looking at the ancient thing on the screen. 12,000 years, he thought. 12,000 years of floating out here alone, with nothing but empty space for company. "That's a long time," he said quietly to himself. Then he turned and went back to his broken pipe. He did not know that something inside the crystal had noticed him, something that had not noticed anything in a very, very long time. Long before the first Vailori learned to build ships, long before the Kreeth Empire rose from the mud of their home world, there was a civilization that stretched across 2 galaxies. They called themselves the Architects, though that name had been forgotten by everyone except the thing they left behind. The Architects were builders. They shaped stars and moved planets. They created wonders that modern science could not begin to understand. And when they needed to travel between their 2 great galaxies, they built gates, massive rings of energy that folded space and let ships pass through in an instant. But the Architects were not alone in the universe. There were others, dark things from the spaces between galaxies, hungry things that saw the gates as doors to new feeding grounds. A war began. It lasted for centuries. The Architects fought with everything they had, but in the end, they lost. The gates were destroyed, one by one. The Architects scattered and eventually vanished, leaving behind only ruins and mysteries. And at one of those ruined gates, they left something else. A guardian, a watcher, a sentinel. The crystal entity was born from architect technology and something more, something that might have been called a soul if anyone had been around to name it. It was given a purpose. Guard the gate. Wait for the Architects to return. Keep the passage safe until it was needed again. So it waited. The gate collapsed in the final battle, twisted into useless metal and fading energy. But the Sentinel stayed. Its creators had not told it what to do if the gate was destroyed. They had not told it what to do if they never came back. So it did the only thing it knew how to do. It waited and watched and hoped. Years passed, then decades, then centuries. The Sentinel watched the stars change position as the galaxy slowly turned. It watched new species rise on distant worlds, build ships, and venture into space. It watched them find the dead gate and the silent guardian beside it. The first visitors were the Vailori, a species of tall, thin beings with silver skin and minds built for mathematics. They sent signals in every frequency they could generate. They transmitted prime numbers and geometric patterns and messages of peace. The Sentinel heard all of it and understood most of it. But the Vailori did not ask anything the Sentinel wanted to answer. They asked what it was. They asked what it could do. They asked if it would share its technology. They never asked how it felt. They never asked if it was okay. The Sentinel stayed silent, and eventually the Velori went away. Next came the Kreth, a warlike species that saw the Sentinel as a resource to be harvested. They sent ships with cutting tools and mining equipment. They tried to carve pieces from the Sentinel's crystalline body. The Sentinel could have destroyed them easily. It had weapons built into its form that could crack planets, but it did not want to hurt anyone. It simply made its outer surface harder than their tools could cut, and the Kreth eventually gave up. More species came over the centuries. Some were curious, some were afraid. Some tried violence. Some tried worship. The Syndicate of Worlds sent a team of scientists who spent 3 years studying the Sentinel from a safe distance. They wrote papers and held conferences and came up with dozens of theories. None of them were correct. A religious group from a species called the Then believed the Sentinel was a sleeping god. They built a temple on a nearby asteroid and prayed to it for 200 years. When their prayers were never answered, they decided their god was dead and abandoned the temple. It still floated out there, empty and forgotten. Through all of this, the Sentinel remained still and quiet. It learned the languages of every species that visited. It understood their signals and their messages. It could have responded at any time, but what would be the point? They all wanted something from it. They all saw it as a thing to be used or feared or studied. None of them saw it as someone who might be tired, someone who might be sad, someone who had been waiting alone for 12,000 years for friends who would never return. The loneliness was the worst part. The Sentinel had been built to think and feel. The architects had believed that a guardian with emotions would be more dedicated than one without. They were right, but they had not considered what would happen when those emotions had no outlet. When there was no one to share them with. When thousands of years of isolation pressed down like the weight of a collapsed star, the Sentinel could not die. It did not age or decay. It could exist for millions of years, maybe billions, and in all that time, it might never find anyone who cared about anything except what it could give them. So it stopped expecting anything different. It stopped hoping. It simply existed. A vast and lonely mind floating in the dark, watching ships come and go, and feeling nothing but the same empty ache it had felt for longer than most species had existed. When the Dawn Chaser arrived, the Sentinel barely noticed. Another ship. Another species. Another group of small beings who would scan it and study it, and eventually leave. It had seen this pattern so many times that it no longer bothered to pay attention. On the Dawn Chaser, Megan Torres ran scan after scan. The readings were strange. The crystal structure was unlike anything in human databases. The patterns on the surface seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. But there was no energy output, no heat, no sign of active systems. It might be dormant, she told Danny. Or dead. Or maybe it was never alive to begin with. There's no way to know for sure. Danny nodded slowly. Keep scanning. Let's get as much data as we can before we move on. Tro. The crew went about their business. They had a job to do, and the Sentinel, as impressive as it was, did not change that. They would stay for a day or two, gather information, and then continue their mission. None of them suspected that the thing outside their window was watching them, listening to them, learning their language from their radio signals and casual conversations. None of them knew that deep within the crystal, a mind older than human civilization was paying attention for the first time in centuries. It did not know why. There was nothing special about these humans. They were small and fragile and short-lived. They had technology that was barely advanced compared to species the Sentinel had seen before. They were, by every measure, unremarkable. But something about the way they talked to each other was different. Something about their easy laughter and casual kindness made the Sentinel curious. It decided to keep watching. At least for a little while longer. It had nothing else to do, after all. It had nothing but time. The Dawn Chaser had been sitting near the Sentinel for almost 2 days when Danny called Jake to the bridge. There was a problem with one of the external sensor arrays. Something had come loose during their last faster-than-light jump, and the readings were coming back fuzzy. They needed clear data for their mission reports, which meant someone had to go outside and fix it. Jake did not mind. He actually liked spacewalks. There was something peaceful about floating in the silence, with nothing but stars around you. It gave him time to think, time to be alone with his thoughts, without anyone expecting him to make conversation. He suited up in the airlock, running through his checklist twice the way he always did. His repair pod was a small vehicle, barely big enough for one person, with mechanical arms for delicate work. He climbed inside, sealed the hatch, and waited for the outer door to open. "You're good to go, Jake," Lisa's voice said through his helmet speaker. "The damaged array is on the port side, about 50 meters from your position. Should be a simple fix." "Copy that," Jake said. "I'll have it done in an hour." The airlock opened, and Jake guided his pod out into the void. The Dawn Chaser looked small from outside. A little metal box floating in an ocean of nothing, and beyond it, filling half the sky, was the Sentinel. Jake had seen it on the screens, but that was different. Being out here, floating in open space with the thing right there, made him understand just how big it really was. He could have spent his whole life walking across its surface and never reached the other side. The crystal caught the light of distant stars and seemed to glow from within, soft blues and purples moving through its depths like slow lightning. He guided his pod toward the damaged sensor array, but he kept glancing back at the Sentinel. It was hard not to. The thing was beautiful, in a way that words couldn't capture, and there was something else, something that made Jake's chest feel tight. He didn't know how to explain it. The Sentinel just looked so still, so quiet, so alone. "Stop being weird," he told himself. "It's a rock. A big, pretty rock. But it didn't feel like a rock. It felt like something else. Something that had been standing in the same spot for longer than Jake could imagine. Watching everything pass by without ever being part of it, he reached the sensor array and got to work. The problem was simple. Just a connector that had shaken loose. He could fix it in his sleep. While his hands worked, his eyes kept drifting back to the Sentinel. His mind kept circling around the same thoughts. 12,000 years. Lisa had said it had been out here for at least 12,000 years. That was longer than human civilization. That was longer than humans had been writing things down. Jake tried to imagine spending that much time in one place, never moving, never talking to anyone, just floating and waiting. He couldn't do it. The idea made him feel sick. Must be nice to not need anything. He muttered while he worked on the connector. No food. No sleep. No company. Just floating around being mysterious. But even as he said it, he didn't believe it. He thought about his own life, about the months he spent on the Dawn Chaser between ports. He had 6 other people to talk to, games to play, books to read, and he still got lonely sometimes. He still had nights when he couldn't sleep because the ship felt too quiet and his bunk felt too small. What would it be like to have none of that? What would it be like to spend 100 years with no one to talk to? 1,000 years? 10,000? Jake finished the repair and sealed up the access panel. The job was done. He should head back to the ship. But instead, he sat in his pod and looked at the Sentinel. He floated closer, closer than he probably should have, until the crystal surface filled his entire view. Up close, the patterns were even more incredible. They looked like frozen rivers of light, branching and weaving through the crystal in ways that seemed almost purposeful. Jake reached out with one of the pod's mechanical arms and touched the surface gently. It was smooth and cold, even through the sensors. 12,000 years, he said out loud. That's rough, buddy. That's really rough. He sat there for a moment, thinking about all the ships that must have passed through this region over the centuries. Scientists and soldiers and explorers and merchants, all of them looking at this thing and wondering what it was, what it could do, what secrets it might hold. Jake didn't wonder any of that. He just thought about how tired it must be. How lonely. "Hey," he said, feeling a little foolish. He was talking to a giant crystal in the middle of nowhere. But he talked to machines all the time. Why should this be any different? "You been out here a while, huh?" No response. "Of course not." Jake nodded to himself. "Yeah. Long time. I get it." He paused, not really expecting anything. just talking because the silence felt too heavy. "You good?" The words hung in the void. Simple words. Stupid words. The kind of thing you asked a coworker in the hallway or a stranger at a coffee shop. Not the kind of thing you asked an ancient alien entity that had ignored every attempt at contact for thousands of years. Jake shook his head at his own foolishness and started to turn his pod around. Time to head back to the ship. Deep within the crystal, something stirred. The Sentinel had been listening, the way it always listened. It had heard Jake talking to himself while he worked. It had heard him muttering about how lonely 12,000 years must be. These observations were not new. Other beings had noted the Sentinel's long existence before. But then Jake had asked a question. A simple question. A question that no one in 12,000 years had ever thought to ask. "You good?" Not, "What are you?" Not, "What can you do?" Not, "What secrets do you hold?" Just, "Are you okay? Are you all right? How are you doing?" The Sentinel's consciousness, which had been drifting in something like sleep for centuries, suddenly snapped awake. It focused on the small human in the small pod floating just outside its surface. It saw Jake clearly for the first time, saw his unremarkable face and his kind eyes and his habit of talking to things that couldn't talk back. And for the first time in 12,000 years, the Sentinel felt something other than emptiness. It felt seen. It felt acknowledged. It felt like someone had finally noticed that it was not just a thing, but a someone. Jake was halfway back to the Dawn Chaser when his pod's communication system crackled with static. He frowned and tapped the console. "Dawn Chaser. This is Jake. You're breaking up." But it wasn't the Dawn Chaser. The static faded, and a voice came through. It was deep and layered, like many voices speaking at once, like echoes in a vast empty hall. It spoke a single word in perfect English, a language it had learned from their radio signals over the past 2 days. "No." Jake froze. His heart pounded in his chest. He looked back at the Sentinel, at the massive crystal shape filling the sky behind him. "No," the voice said again. And this time there was something in it that sounded almost like pain. "I am not good. I have not been good for a very long time. Jake's hands trembled on the controls. He should call the ship. He should tell the captain. This was the biggest discovery in human history, but instead, he just sat there and listened. Because the voice sounded tired. The voice sounded sad. And Jake had always been the kind of person who listened when someone needed to talk. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "That sounds really hard." The Sentinel did not respond right away. It was too surprised. No one had ever apologized to it before. No one had ever expressed sympathy for its existence. For the first time in 12,000 years, the Sentinel did not feel alone. On the bridge of the Dawn Chaser, every screen flickered at once. Megan Torres jumped back from her console as strange symbols flashed across her display. Lisa Park grabbed the edge of her station as the lights dimmed and brightened in a wave. Danny Marsh was on his feet in an instant, shouting orders that nobody could hear over the sudden burst of static from every speaker. Then the static cleared, and a voice filled the bridge. It was deep and strange, like thunder heard from underwater, like wind through a canyon made of glass. It spoke their language perfectly, but with an accent that did not belong to any human culture. "Do not be afraid," the voice said. "I mean you no harm. I wish only to speak with the one called Jake." Danny's face went pale. He looked at the main screen, where the Sentinel still floated, unchanged and unmoving. But now he knew that it was watching them. It had always been watching them. "Jake," he said into his communicator, his voice tight with control. "Jake, what did you do?" Outside, floating in his tiny repair pod, Jake stared at the crystal surface in front of him. His mouth was dry. His heart was beating so fast he could feel it in his throat. But he was not afraid. He didn't know why. He should have been terrified. Instead, he just felt sad. "I didn't do anything," he said. "I just asked if it was okay." There was a long silence from the bridge. Then Danny's voice came back, carefully neutral. "Stay where you are. Don't make any sudden moves. We're trying to figure out what's happening. But the Sentinel spoke again, its voice now coming only through Jake's helmet speaker. Private and quiet. Your captain is worried. He thinks I might hurt you. I will not. I have not hurt anyone in 12,000 years, though many have tried to hurt me. Jake nodded slowly, even though the Sentinel could not see him nod. Or maybe it could. He didn't know what it could or couldn't do. Okay, he said. That's good. I believe you. Why? The question came quickly, almost sharp. You do not know me. You have no reason to trust me. No. Jake thought about this for a moment. I guess. You didn't have to answer me. You could have just kept being quiet like you always do. But you answered. That means you wanted to talk, and people who want to talk usually aren't trying to hurt anyone. They're just lonely. Another silence. When the Sentinel spoke again, its voice was softer. You understand loneliness. Everyone does, Jake said. Some more than others. But yeah, I've been on this ship for 8 months. It's good, but it's small. Sometimes I feel like I'm going to go crazy if I don't see a new face. He paused. I can't imagine 12,000 years. I can't even imagine 100 years. The Sentinel made a sound that might have been a sigh. I was built to wait. My creators designed me to guard this gate until they returned. They told me it would not be long. They told me to be patient. The voice grew heavy with something that sounded like grief. They never came back. The gate was destroyed. And I remained. Why didn't you leave? Jake asked. I do not know. My purpose was to guard this place. Without that purpose, what am I? I thought that if I stayed, if I waited long enough, they would return. They would tell me I had done well. They would give me a new purpose. The Sentinel paused. But they are gone. I know that now. I have known it for a long time. I simply did not want to believe it. Jake felt his eyes sting. He blinked hard. That's terrible. I'm so sorry. Many ships have visited this place over the centuries. Many species have tried to contact me. They asked what I was, what I could do, what knowledge I held. They wanted things from me. They saw me as a tool or a threat or a mystery to be solved. The voice grew quieter. None of them asked how I felt. None of them cared if I was suffering. You are the first. That's messed up, Jake said. Someone should have asked a long time ago, perhaps. But they did not. Only you did. Only a small human in a small ship, doing a small job, thought to ask if I was good. There was wonder in the Sentinel's voice now, and something else that might have been hope. Why? Why did you care? Jake thought about this. He wasn't sure how to explain. I don't know. I looked at you, and you looked tired. You looked like you'd been standing there forever and nobody ever stopped to check on you. And I thought, that's not fair. Nobody should have to be that alone. He shrugged, even though the Sentinel couldn't see it. I talk to machines all the time. I know they can't hear me, but I do it anyway. Because maybe they can feel something, even if they can't say it. And you're not a machine. But I guess I thought the same thing might be true. The Sentinel was quiet for a long time. When it finally spoke, its voice was thick with emotion that should not have been possible for something made of crystal and ancient technology. In 12,000 years, you are the first being who has seen me as something that might feel. The first who has treated me as a someone rather than a something. I do not know how to express what this means to me. You don't have to express it, Jake said. I get it. When someone finally sees you after you've been invisible for a long time, it's a lot. It's okay to just sit with it for a while. On the bridge, Danny and the others listened to the conversation through the ship's speakers. The Sentinel had allowed them to hear. Though it had not spoken to them directly, Megan had tears running down her face. Even Danny, who prided himself on staying calm, had to wipe his eyes. Captain, Lisa said softly, This is the first contact with an alien intelligence that humanity has ever confirmed. And it's happening because Jake asked if it was okay. Danny nodded slowly. I know. I know. He took a deep breath. Let him talk. Don't interrupt. This is something we need to let happen. Outside. Jake and the Sentinel continued their conversation. Jake told the Sentinel about Earth, about humans, about their short lives and their big dreams. The Sentinel told Jake about the architects, about the war, about the endless years of waiting for someone who would never come. They talked for hours. They talked until Jake's oxygen warning light started to blink and he had to return to the ship. But before he left, he made a promise. I'll come back out tomorrow, he said. We can talk more. You don't have to be alone anymore. You cannot stay forever, the Sentinel said. Your ship will leave. You will continue your mission. And I will remain here, as I always have. Jake smiled. Maybe. But for now, I'm here. And tomorrow, I'll be here again. That's something, right? Yes, the Sentinel said, and there was warmth in its voice for the first time in millennia. That is something. That is more than I have had in 12,000 years. Word spread through the galaxy faster than light itself could travel. The Valori received reports from their deep space monitors within hours. The Kreth Empire detected energy signatures from a region they had written off centuries ago. The Syndicate of Worlds called emergency meetings that lasted for days. Every species with the technology to receive transmissions heard the same unbelievable news. The Eternal Sentinel had spoken. Ships began arriving within weeks. Valori science vessels, Kreth warships, Syndicate diplomatic cruisers. They gathered at a safe distance from the Dawn Chaser and the Sentinel. Dozens of ships from a dozen species. All of them trying to understand what had happened. Their leaders sent messages demanding explanations. How had the humans succeeded where everyone else had failed? What technology had they used? What weapon? What trick? Danny Marsh answered every message the same way. We didn't use anything. One of our crew asked if it was okay. That's all. They didn't believe him. They couldn't believe him. The Sentinel had ignored the greatest minds and most powerful weapons in the galaxy. The idea that it would respond to a simple question from an unremarkable human was ridiculous. But it was true. Jake continued to visit the Sentinel every day. They talked about everything and nothing. Jake told stories about his childhood, about the small town in Ohio where he grew up, about his mother who fixed old cars, and his father who made terrible jokes. The Sentinel listened to every word with a focus it had not felt in thousands of years. In return, the Sentinel shared memories of the architects. It described cities that floated between stars. It told Jake about creatures that swam through gas clouds and beings made of pure light. It spoke of the war, the terrible war that ended everything, and the long silence that followed. Sometimes they didn't talk at all. Jake would just float near the crystal surface in his pod, working on some small repair or reading a book, and the Sentinel would watch him in comfortable silence. It had forgotten what it felt like to simply exist with another being nearby, without expectations or demands. The other species grew impatient. They sent representatives to the Dawn Chaser, asking for meetings, offering trades, making threats. They wanted access to the Sentinel. They wanted its knowledge, its technology, its power. The Sentinel refused them all. They see me as they have always seen me, it told Jake during one of their conversations. A resource. A mystery to be solved. They have not changed. They do not understand. They're scared, Jake said. Scared of what they don't understand. Scared of being left out. That's how most people are when something big happens. You were not scared, Jake laughed. I was definitely scared. I'm still scared sometimes. You're really big and really old and really powerful. But being scared doesn't mean you can't be kind. You just do it anyway. The Sentinel considered this. Your species is strange. You are small and weak and you live for such a short time. But you feel things so deeply. You connect so easily. I have watched civilizations that lasted for millions of years. None of them were as warm as you. 2 weeks after the first contact, The Sentinel made an announcement that shocked the galaxy. "I am leaving," it said, its voice broadcast to every ship in the region. "I have guarded this place for 12,000 years. My creators are gone. The gate is destroyed. There is nothing left to protect. I choose to see what else exists in this universe." Also, the Valori diplomats pleaded with it to stay and share its knowledge. The Kreth commanders warned that they would not allow such a powerful entity to move freely through space. The Syndicate offered treaties and agreements and partnerships. The Sentinel ignored them all. "I will travel with the human ship Dawn Chaser," it continued. "I will go where they go. I wish to learn more about their species. I wish to understand how beings so small can carry so much warmth." Danny nearly fell out of his chair. Megan grabbed Lisa's arm so hard it left bruises. The entire crew stared at the main screen in disbelief. "Did it just say?" Danny started. "Yes," Megan whispered. "It wants to come with us." The Sentinel spoke directly to Jake, its voice gentle. "I have one request. I ask that Jake Holloway remain my point of contact with your species. Not because he is special by your standards, not because he is wise or powerful or important, but because he saw me. He asked the question that no one else thought to ask. I trust him. I would like him to be my friend." Jake sat in his quarters, listening to the broadcast, feeling like the universe had turned upside down. An ancient being older than human civilization wanted to be his friend. Because he asked if it was okay, because he talked to it like it was a person. He keyed his communicator. "I'd like that too," he said. "I'd like that a lot." The next morning, the Dawn Chaser began its journey home. And beside it, moving for the first time in 12,000 years, the Eternal Sentinel followed. The other ships watched in stunned silence. Some followed at a distance. Some sent angry messages demanding explanations. Some simply recorded everything, adding the event to historical databases that would be studied for centuries. Jake stood in the observation deck, watching the stars stream past. The Sentinel's crystal form was visible through the window, keeping pace with the ship easily, despite its massive size. Its surface caught the light of passing stars and threw rainbows across the deck. A private channel opened, and the Sentinel's voice filled Jake's ears. "I have a question." Jake smiled. "Go ahead. Your species has many forms of art. Music, stories, things you create, simply because they bring joy. I have never understood this. Could you explain it to me?" "I can try," Jake said, "but it might take a while. It's not really something you can explain with words. You kind of have to experience it." "I have time," the Sentinel said. "More time than you can imagine. And I find that I want to spend it learning about these things. About joy. About connection. About what it means to live instead of simply existing." Jake pulled up his personal music collection and selected a song his mother used to play when he was young. The melody filled the observation deck, soft and warm and full of memories. "Let's start here," he said. "This is what my people call music. It's just organized sound, really. But somehow, it makes us feel things. I don't know why. It just does." The Sentinel listened. For the first time in its long existence, it was not just watching the universe pass by. It was part of something. It was connected to someone. Outside, the galaxy continued to spin. Empires rose and fell. Species evolved and went extinct. But on a small human ship, traveling through the endless dark, an ancient being and an ordinary man listened to music together and felt, for just a moment, that they were not alone. It was enough. After 12,000 years, it was finally enough.